The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 20th chapter, beginning with the first verse. Jesus tells the parable about God's generosity, challenging the common assumption that God rewards people according to what they have earned or deserved. Jesus said to the disciples, "The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into the vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, 'You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right.' So they did the same. And about 5 o'clock, he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, 'Why are you standing here idle all day?' And they said to him, 'Because no one has hired us.' And he said to them, 'You also go into the vineyard.' And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to the manager, 'Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first.' When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now, when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, 'These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat.' But he replied to them, 'Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last.'" The gospel of the Lord. You may be seated. I love these lessons, and I love the fact that we get Jonah first, because Jonah is one of those lessons or stories that we all enjoy. I mean, how many of you grew up with VeggieTales and watched, the little cucumber or whatever yes, you all had kids you had to suffer through. Luckily, there was no Caillou that did it, right? Because none of us would have watched that. But anyways, the whole deal with Jonah is that we can kind of understand where he's getting to, but how many of you really kind of see him as a kind of a big old crybaby? And the deal is that you're supposed to see him as a crybaby. And if you ever go back and, it's only three little chapters. And in the Hebrew, it is so funny because it's actually a comedy. It's one of those ones you need to get over the fact that did he really live and get swallowed by a whale? And, we could all get upset and fight over that. But the truth is, no matter what kind of a story it is, at the end of the day, it's a comedy. Because not only does Jonah get called to go do this, and he says, "No, I'm not going to do it," and he runs the opposite direction, and he jumps on a boat, and the term that they keep using in the Hebrew is every time he gets hurled. And hurled really does mean thrown up, right? They said hurl back in ancient times too, They drank too much wine and would hurl, like we all did in college, like all their Cal Poly friends right now are suffering from this morning. That's what they do. So they find out so he runs away, he goes the wrong direction, and he runs onto a boat. There's a great big storm. They figure out, the people on the boat, that it was his fault, so they hurl him overboard, right? And so then he gets swallowed by a whale, and then he doesn't sit real well in the whale's guts. And so what does the whale do? Hurls him onto the shore, right? So he gets hurled a lot, right? And so you're supposed to laugh at that. You're supposed to enjoy that. And you're supposed to laugh at Jonah. Because you know that Jonah doesn't want to do the job because he knows God's nature. He knows that God is loving, he's compassionate, he's forgiving. He's all those things, and he really doesn't want those Ninevites to be forgiven. It's like being a child with a sibling, right? And you want that sibling to have consequences for their actions. And you know what that right action is, and you know what it should be, and your parents don't do it. So you go and slam your door. I had like 4 brothers and 4 sisters. There was a lot of door slamming. And they would go in and they would pout. And they would wait for somebody to come and talk to them. And if you were a good parent, you just don't. It's like, get over it, right? But God is a good parent, and God does come and talk to him. And what does God say to him? Why are you angry? Because I'm merciful. And I think Jonah wants to say, I'm not angry that you're merciful to me. I'm angry that you're merciful to the people I don't like, right? And that's why it's a beautiful setup to the workers in the vineyard. It really is. Because when I read this story to my husband the first time, he hated it. How many of you have done shift work? I mean, you get on a Friday, you know, that after, we used to work graveyard shift. That's how we met at a bean cannery doing graveyard work. And, you know, Friday morning, you go and get your check, and if I got paid the same as somebody that just got hired at 6 o'clock in the morning at the end of the week, I would be upset. I would unionize. I would be like, no, I would do that. We all would. And you're supposed to feel that way, especially because Jesus tells this parable right on the heels of the parable we heard last week, where all of us were a bit indignant with the guy that was forgiven so much and then turned around and wouldn't forgive the guy little. Remember that last week? You're like, no, that was a week ago, Laura. I'm not going to remember it. Well, I'm going to remind you, that's what happened. And you guys were all like, that guy's a jerk, right? How could he do that? How could he be forgiven of like this mass amount and turn around and begrudge this guy being forgiven, you know, and not even forgive just this little tiny amount? And you say, right, God, throw that guy in jail. But then when it's like, hey, I've been working, and these guys ain't been working, and I've been keeping track, right? I know how many hours I've been working. And we do that in the church a lot. We do. We're like, well, I've been here forever. And that's not the way we do it. It's the way that you guys aren't unique, okay? That's like churches across the world. It's mosques, it's synagogues, it's the Freemasons. You know, anytime there's a big group, there's always been some that's been there forever, and they've done it forever. And then you're not going to let those newcomers come in. We're going to tell you how it's done. That's just the way it is, right? But then I stopped to think about probably the worst person in all of the biblical history is Paul was probably the worst at probably doing that before he was converted and had his experience on the road to Damascus. He was a good rabbi. He was a good Pharisee. And there was a way you did things. And there was a tally, and you click, 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 and you did that. And if you weren't doing your part, you know, he was going to hold you to task. He would have gone to those last laborers and said, you ain't getting paid until you've worked all night, right? But I think what happens is, and what I think we all need to hear this, is that these guys, they sound like they were standing idle, but they weren't hired. They just weren't hired. And they had families to feed. They had rent to pay. They had things that needed to be taken care of. And God saw that need and is merciful and paid them what he wanted to pay them. But then I stopped to think a second. You know, here you have in Philippians, you have Paul in jail. He's no longer Saul, now he's Paul. And what would that man in jail given to get one more person to hear the gospel, even if it was at the last hour? That's what happens when you're not keeping track anymore and your heart is full of the gospel. You don't care how long you've been doing it, because your motivation and what propels you forward is the desire to share that gospel at all times, so that person at the last minute can hear it. Isn't that what we are as a congregation? I'm not keeping tally on you guys. I don't care how long you've been here. I don't care how short of a time you've been here. Because just like the owner of the vineyard, he had a job that needed to get done. And that's the deal with the church. We have a job to get done. So if we've been here since it was created, or you are a legacy to here, or you've been here since forever and you don't even know how to keep track. Isn't it beautiful that you've been given the gift to go out and hire those last people who just need to hear the word? Because at the end of the day, like Deanna pointed out, we are all equal. We're all equal because we're all commissioned. We're all commissioned to do the gospel. And you know, it might be taking food down to Santa Maria. It might be gathering to do the women's retreat. It might be our work that we can find, maybe open the doors to Cal Poly. It might be something that we do with the homeless. It might be any of those things, but it's what we've been charged to do, and we've been guaranteed the daily wage, and that's salvation. And that's the joy of living in it. And when you quit keeping track of who's done the most time, and who has the most seniority, and your whole goal is to just share this good news with everyone you come into contact with, then we get it. And then beautiful things grow. Let it grow within you. Be the worker in the vineyard. Whether you've been here 12 hours, 6 hours, 1 hour, whether you've been here since the 1960s when you remember when Quist Hall was the sanctuary, or you just walked in through this door today. We're all the workers in the vineyard. Just do the job and be happy you've been asked. Amen.